So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is quite an interesting one really, because while the name of the map is something we've seen many times before, the actual map itself is not, because this is actually a placeholder for CAIR ANDROS, because as many of you know, I'm sure, the version of CAIR ANDROS which is in 0.97 doesn't actually work at the moment. All of the Númenórean architecture sort of named settlements don't actually work at the moment, although the hotfix is now in full swing, and sooner rather than later I think we will sort of see those maps get added back in, but for the time being a version of this map has been created to sort of fill the gap, as it were. So obviously it's not quite the same as the original CAIR ANDROS, which had this large island in the middle surrounded by walls and architecture and a big city in the middle, but for the most part the layout and how this map is going to work is remarkably similar for the most part, to be honest. They're going to cross onto the central island initially, of course, and then there are several defences within and several layers that the defenders will have to try and take advantage of. There is one notable difference, I think, and that is the fact that the defenders actually have access to this entire shore, this half of the map, because in normal CAIR ANDROS they're of course surrounded on all sides. They're not actually on this occasion, although to be honest with you, if the blue team so desired here, the attackers, they could just cross over quite easily and start to contest that as well. So it's unlikely we'll actually see the defenders take advantage of that, as it were. And also the blue team do also partially, at least, start on the island which CAIR ANDROS is located on as well, because of the deployment zones. But like I said, not really going to make too much of a difference. Like, these hills and mountains over here are going to be the battle line facing southwards, and then the choke point that's over here will also be another one as well. But let's go through the attacking armies first of all, and with the player who sent me the battle replay, which is Steward of Dale. I think he's actually responsible for the creation of this map as well. I might be wrong, but nonetheless I think it is also a good versus evil siege, so nice and lore friendly, and he is going to be playing as Khan. So he's got some nomadic marauders here. Cheap javelins, like I said, are always going to be worthwhile, because you don't stand to lose much in the way of an investment if they do die without doing an awful lot. But you do stand to gain quite a lot, actually, because javelins, of course, are capable of dealing out decent armor-piercing damage, and also when they're in numbers as great as the really low-end stuff, like the nomadic marauders, even though individually they will go down very easily to archers, the archers still have to chew their way through quite a lot of bodies before the javelins are actually rendered relatively harmless. So definitely a good unit to bring in this situation, where you have to be a little bit more economical when you're on the attack, because your army is going to have access to less money overall individually. The Brotherhood of the Wain are an interesting choice, actually. Chariots, of course, are capable of running over lines and dealing not so much damage initially. They are capable of doing a lot of damage, of course. The Brotherhood of the Wain especially, because they also wield crossbows, which means their missiles are quite capable. But the main thing that Chariots will engender is a sense of disorganisation in the units that they hit, provided the units are not well prepared to meet the Chariot charge. The defensive line can become very panicked very quickly, which of course is the last thing the defenders want. As the defenders, when you're outnumbered like this, you need your lines to remain solid, otherwise the attackers are likely to wash over you. So a risky pick, I would say, but also quite a good one. As long as they're not too reliant on stuff like this, the attackers should be just fine, even if they end up not really making much use of them. Variag warriors are another good choice. Like, among heavy swordsmen, Variag warriors are among some of the weakest in the game, especially without their armor upgrade like they are here. But heavy swordsmen still offer you decent high-end base damage, and also good melee defense for what they are, especially when you compare them to line infantry that's a similar cost. Of course, the main downside to this is they don't have a shield, which, especially when you're on the attack in a siege like this, can be a bit of an issue, because the defenders, more often than not, are going to have very nice positions from which to shoot you with any ranged units they may have, and a unit like the Variag warriors is a very prime target for that, because not only will they die easily, but they're a unit that you really don't want to have to deal with in melee with your own units if you can help it. The Watcher is here, which, based on the layout of the map, it'll be interesting to see if the Watcher can get a good angle, but if it can, that will be bad for the defenders, because it's a very awkward thing to deal with once it gets you in its sights, especially when you have to hold your ground like the defenders will have to here. A lot of Nurad footmen, which again, when you're on the attack in a siege as Khan, this is pretty much a given. Most of the time when you're in a siege, of course, you can't rely on just swarming with cavalry like Khan can do on a more open map. But the Nurad footmen are a very solid unit. Their armour is decent, their shield value is very impressive actually, and of course armour-piercing attacks in melee, which should be quite useful against at least one of the defending armies. Nurad Stormguard, they actually don't have a phalanx anymore, but they are still halberdiers, multiple HP halberdiers. Of of course, very nice AP damage that they can lay out as well. Pretty much the ideal place to put your general in a situation like this when you don't want to put him in a cavalry unit. Again, pretty much a given that you bring them in a siege as Khand, whether you're on the attack or defence. Nurad halberds do have a phalanx, however, which is a very useful tool in a siege, of course. Pikes can outrange them naturally, but if you can bring a phalanx unit, whether on the attack or the defence, it often pays to do so. But leave them for a little bit later in the battle, otherwise they will get shot up very easily by arrows. But yeah, very nice to see some Nurad halberds. Brotherhood of the Spear are in here, and actually I have been made aware of a new unit, well, I say new unit model, a new weapon at the very least that these guys have, because at the moment, of course, their spears look almost like they're made out of foam. They look quite strange, but a new model is going to be coming for them in the hotfix as well, which makes it look a little bit more like a Yari, which brings it more into line with the sort of Eastern aesthetic that Khand have going on, which is very nice. Brotherhood of the Axe are in here as well, which a unit I'm a pretty big fan of. The only problem with them is they are maybe a little bit expensive for what they are. Like most heavy axemen like this do have a tendency to die off fairly quickly, whether to ranged or melee units because of their lower melee defense. At least they die more quickly to sort of more quality based units. And the Brotherhood of the Axe are quite expensive as well. Among all of the sort of higher end heavy axemen before you start straying into bodyguard tier units, they are the most expensive. But their stats are pretty impressive, honestly, and against armoured units, of course, they are very dominant. A lot more Nurad units. There's actually a unit of nomadic infantry in here as well, so some archers, of course. Very nice unit of archers to have, quite similar in many ways to something like the Balakith marksman or Bardian marksman, albeit maybe a little bit less good, but they're still very good for what they are. Nomadic warriors in here as well for numbers, and also some Variag bowmen. So good to see the sort of skirmish archers here as well, because Khand can definitely dip into that side of warfare as well. Pretty much what you'd expect from a Khandish army, to be honest with you. Tundra's Fox playing as Mordor. I'll probably try and go through the army compositions a little bit more quickly than I just did, so I don't drag on for too long. Orc Javelins, again, a very useful unit for the same reason the Nomadic Marauders are, albeit the Orc Javelins, they're in a sort of denser formation, like the Nomadic Marauders have got that sort of horde or mob formation, which actually helps them a little bit more against arrow fire, to be honest with you, rather than the Orc Javelin one, but Orc Javelin's still good for exactly the same reasons. Fodder, of course, free, may as well bring them, even if they are trash in melee, of course. A lot of Morannon infantry, so Mordor have got a few options when it comes to sort of their quality quantity split. Morannon infantry brought here in force, they're not as good as some other Orc infantry, like for example the Uruk-hai, but they do fulfill the same role. There are more of them, and they are slightly cheaper, so they do give you a little bit more leeway to bring some of Mordor's higher end options, of which they have quite a few. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, good choice in an offensive siege, and a defensive one actually, as we have seen in the past as well. Their ability to mass push is very, very useful if used at the right time. Ever since 0.97 rolled around, mass pushes are a little bit more awkward, in the sense that they are a little bit more easy to counter, and if you don't succeed in pushing through and you try it, then the unit that you tried to do it with, like the Blackguard here, will end up getting massacred very quickly, especially to quality units. So Mordor do need to be careful, but potentially very useful tool if used correctly. Sauron's Will, another one of those heavy axemen units. They're significantly cheaper, well I say significantly, noticeably cheaper than the Brotherhood of the Axe over in Khand. Obviously not quite as good as a result, but they still offer you much the same sort of thing. A lot of AP on those huge axes that they wield. Temple Guard, an armor-piercing archer, very capable in melee as well. Olag-hai and Bulldogs are up here as well. The Bulldogs and the Nazgul. The Bulldogs are actually armor-piercing in spite of the fact they wield swords, but they're a relatively small unit as well in terms of their unit size alongside the Nazgul. And also, actually, a unit we haven't seen in a long while, actually. What are they called again? The Beasts of Gorgoroth, that's it. So essentially it's Mordor's answer to the Mumakil. They're not quite as scary as the Mumakil in melee, to be honest with you, but I do think they actually throw javelins, which makes their missile attack at the very least a little bit better. But if you struggle with the Mumakil, you'll struggle with the Beasts of Gorgoroth even more, because their margin for error is even smaller. And I think we have another Mordor army here, indeed we do, played by Y2K86. He's got some Olag-hai as well, which, like I've said in the past, trolls, a little bit tricky to use properly. Like, you have to be very aware of what you can do, but as we saw in the last battle actually under the command of Eothad, with those trolls of the White Hand, if you do use them correctly, they can be very, very powerful. Orc Fodder here on the front line. Morannon halberds, good to see more phalanx units. Even if we haven't seen any pikes from the attackers yet, units like this will mean that the defenders can't get quite so comfortable in the late game if all of these halberdiers come marching forward. If they get committed too early though, prime target for archers. Morannon archers, again, good for a skirmish fight like this. Not quite as good as the Khandish archers that they're going to be fighting alongside, because the Khandish archers have shields, but mostly the idea is the same here. They're not really designed to deal incredible amounts of damage to the enemy, just to sort of engage with them, waste a bit of the enemy's ammunition, do a bit of damage with their own arrows as well, but again, certainly not a match-winning unit, as none of them around on units for Mordor are. Infantry again. More Blackguard, so a lot of great shield units. The defenders will definitely have to be on the watch for those. 2 more Orc Javelins, and a unit of upgraded Temple Executioners, one of the strongest units of heavy swordsmen in the game. But no longer are they in second place on that list. They are in third, because the Pharazim Swordmasters have knocked them down a peg. And then the 2 armies that are going to be trying to take the more direct route to the new CAIR Andros' city are going to be Rhun, played by the Vengeful One, Variag Mercenaries with the armour upgrade. More often than not recently you've seen the Nar Rim in this role, but I really do agree with bringing the Variag Mercenaries on this one. The shields, the armour, very similar to the Belagyr archers in terms of function, and that's exactly what you want in this situation. Rhun do have some damaging archers, but in this case I really do think that trying to wear the enemy down is probably the wiser course of action. Some Eastron Guard as well, so some two-handed spears. Fragile, they do need to be careful when it comes to arrow fire, but in melee, for what they cost, they are quite impressive actually, in addition to having a pretty decent anti-cavalry presence. Another chariot unit actually, the Wain Rider, so there's a lot of sort of these really high mass, specialised cavalry units that we're seeing on the field today. I saw the Mumakil in the background just a second ago as well. So 2 chariots, 2 war beast units. Be interesting to see if they are used correctly, because if they are, it's going to be very difficult for the defenders to hold their lines together, but if they aren't, it's a lot of money down the drain and the defenders will be feeling very confident from that point onwards. We shall see. Eastron Crossbowmen with the armour upgrade, it will mitigate some damage from the arrow fire they're inevitably going to be taking a little bit, but among the crossbows, this is the one where, yes, they still have the same sort of stopping power and damage that other crossbows have, but archers are much more likely to kill them off. So as Rhun, you can't afford to just send your crossbows in unthinkingly, otherwise they will be cut down. But having said that, they're fairly cheap as well for what they are, so even if you do end up losing them for relatively little, it's not the end of the world. Then we have a combined phalanx of Gamp Rim and of course the Flag Rim covering them, so more halberdiers, some armour piercing line infantry as well, very very nice, always useful in this sort of situation. And in behind them we have some Baltros tribesmen for yet more javelins, so quite a similar approach for most of these armies, to be honest with you, and it's an approach that I most certainly agree with. Dragon's Wrath Warlords are a bit of a new one, however, a multiple HP Lancer unit, a heavy cataphract, and could be handy if they can break the enemy lines with their high mass units and then start running around inside the settlement. A unit of cavalry doing that is always a source of concern for the defenders, but that's a big if. If the defenders play their cards right, they shouldn't have to deal with that, because their lines should be able to maintain their rigidity. And then finally, Mr. Sneakman, with a faction we actually haven't seen in quite a while at this point in Harad, which is kind of odd, to be honest with you, because it's not as if Harad are that weak in 0.97, I don't think. They have all of the tools that they've always had. Dismounted Serpent Guard for one, quite similar in terms of price and effectiveness to the Uruk-hai infantry, albeit a little bit less durable, which I think is why I do prefer the Uruk-hai of the 2 units. Like, when it comes to a line infantry unit, you want them to be durable more than anything else, but they are quite damaging, the Dismounted Serpent Guard, and perhaps a better comparison would actually be the Westmark infantry from Rohan. We also have some Trollmen and some Demons of the Desert, some Hashari Shadows in there as well, Southrons. The Trollmen units are really one of the main draws for Harad. They're really, pound for pound, they're a really very effective unit. And yeah, definitely a very good part of Harad, which is good because the rest of their army, Southron, Pikemen and Warband, are both AP, but they are quite fragile as well. Numerous, but fragile. So it'll be interesting to see if they can sort of keep themselves alive long enough to be effective in an elongated fight for a city like this. Haradrim Spearmen, of course, are very low tier. They're not quite as bad as Orc Fodder, but neither are they completely free. A better unit to compare them to might be the Dunland Clansmen from Isengard. Champions of Nathrat are in here as well, the finest of all the Trollmen units. And that's pretty much it. Southrons, Haradrim, Serpent Guard and a lot of Trollmen. And then, of course, the pièce de résistance, as it were, the Mumakil. Which, of course, in terms of their ability to just be really scary monsters, are stronger than the Beasts of Gorgoroth, even if they don't have those javelins on their back. But once again, it'll be interesting to see if they are used to their fullest. Now, we shall have a look at the defenders, starting off with Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud. Good to see him again. The last battle he sent me was of very high quality indeed. And he's going to be playing as Gondor, so fighting on home turf here. Marksman of CAIR Andros, as well as some Gondor infantry. So we know what to expect from Gondor. Lots of heavily armoured units, lots of staying power in melee, which they're going to need. And of course, lots of archers, which again, they are most certainly going to need. They're going to want their infantry to hold the line, and they're going to want their archers to do the damage. Gondor infantry with the armour upgrade is very effective at doing that sort of thing. In melee, in terms of their damage dealing potential, they're not as impressive as the Serpent Guard they're going to be facing off against. But the armour and the shields should certainly help them in their endeavours to hold the line. A unit I'm a big fan of as well, the Citadel Guard. Like, their stats are very impressive. They may be spears, but the fact that they're armour piercing more than makes up for the spear malice, to be honest with you. And this is really the theme of Gondor. Like, all of their spears are good for what they are, and really the best examples of that are obviously going to be the higher end spears as well. Citadel Guard, Fountain Guard, Nimlothian Honour Guard, all are very, very effective for Gondor, and in this situation they should be as well. Not so much against Harad, to be honest with you, because the AP is not really as useful there, but against Rhun it will be. Raven Helms of CAIR ANDROS, though, a very good unit to have against Harad, because their high base damage is not going to be interrupted by any sort of armour, so Harad are going to really need to be careful of this kind of unit. But having said that, Harad and Rhun are both factions with a pretty high AP focus, which is going to be very useful against pretty much the entirety of the Gondorian army, to be honest with you, regardless of what they brought. Fountain Guard, very, very effective unit, as we said. Nimlothian Honour Guard as well, really ahead of the game here. Guards of Osgiliath, the Gondorian pike unit. They can only bring 2 before the cost increases, which does mean they can't actually field as many pikes as you might expect, considering their sort of spear and polearm focus. But what they are, the Guards of Osgiliath, is a very effective pike unit on the front line, and because of the amount of spears they have elsewhere, like, you don't really end up noticing the fact that in terms of sheer numbers of pikes, the likes of Cardolan and Isengard can outnumber Gondor. It doesn't really matter too much. Gondor's abilities there are still more than adequate. Citadel Guard, Gondor infantry, and some veterans of Osgiliath as well, with the armour upgrade, obviously very effective in melee. They're just as effective, if not slightly more so, than the Gondor infantry in melee, as well as having that decent ranged attack as well. Viper Action is also playing as a Gondorian army. He's got some Gondor infantry. He's gone for some upgraded Axemen of Lasarnak, which again, I'm a big fan of this unit, because as far as Axemen go of this type, they are noticeably cheaper than some units, like, for example, the Brotherhood of the Axe across the way. But when you upgrade their armour to its fullest, as Viper Action has here, the loss of effectiveness if you transition from the Brotherhood of the Axe to the Axemen of Lasarnak is actually not that high. And to be honest, yeah, I just feel like the Axemen of Lasarnak are really good for what they cost, especially in comparison to a lot of the other Axemen. In fact, the only one I would rate more highly than the Axemen of Lasarnak in terms of value for money would probably be the Balakath Guard from Umbar, and that's only because they have a little bit of an advantage with their melee defense, which is something Axemen traditionally struggle with. Marksmen of CAIR ANDROS from Eclipse, a lot more Gondor infantry, Fountain Guard, Guards of Osgiliath, more Raven Helms in the back pocket up here, a very nastily positioned ballista. He needs to be careful though, because obviously on a cliff like this, Medieval 2 Siege does have a bit of a tendency to sort of slide off, which can be a real pain, and I'm sure the temptation will be to try and shoot the enemies as they cross the land bridge there, but you do run the risk of losing your own siege by doing that. That classic Medieval 2 pathfinding. More Marksmen of CAIR ANDROS over here. We have some Guards of Osgiliath as well. Citadel Guard, Fountain Guard, Guards of Osgiliath. So very similar armies here from Gondor, which is unsurprising. Like, you know what Gondor are going to do when they're on the defence. They're going to pack it on in terms of most of their defensive units of infantry, augment it a little bit with some more aggressive units like the Heavy Axemen and Swordsmen. But of course their archers are going to be the primary way in which they try to deal damage, as their very effective infantry tries to hold the line. Gondor archers, Pelargir Marines, obviously decent javelins, nothing too special, but certainly will suffice if they get into a good position here. More Gondor infantry. It'll be interesting to see what route the attackers take here. And another unit of... Actually, no, not another unit of Pelargir Marines. We have Lango, who's going to be playing as Dol Amroth, Gondor's natural allies, of course. Belfalas Marines up on the side here. They do have a few similarities, Dol Amroth. For the most part, I would say they are less impressive with regards to their infantry than Gondor, certainly. They do have access to a Halberdier unit, though. The Athlon Halberdiers should be a very useful tool. The Athlon Men-at-Arms, again, like, they only have one armour upgrade, so while they may look as heavily armoured as the Gondor infantry, in actual fact, they're not. And ultimately I would say the Gondor infantry are slightly the better of the two units. Neither of them are anything too special, because that's not really what they're all about. But again, Gondor have got a slight edge there. One thing that Dol Amroth do have that Gondor don't have access to is a Maceman unit. The Black Swan Renegades here. Macemen, to be honest with you, though, are not my favourite class of unit in 0.97. Like, if you're going to go for AP, just go all in for a unit of Axemen or something like that. But that's not something Dol Amroth have, in all fairness. So if you want to go for AP infantry as Dol Amroth, you kind of need to go for these Macemen. And the Black Swan Renegades are by no means a poor unit. Like, in terms of what tier of unit they are, they're up alongside, in terms of cost, stuff like the Alcarondas Legion. but of course it is offset by the fact that they really do need to be up against armoured units to be as effective. 2 units of Tirithea marksmen, again, when you compare them to the Gondorian equivalent, the CAIR Andros marksmen, at range they're very similar to one another, but of course the CAIR Andros marksmen have got the advantage of being pretty strong in melee with their 2-handed sword. Tirithea marksmen only have the 1-handed sword, so they're significantly less effective there. However, some of the more effective units that Dol Amroth have available to them, Knights of the Silver Swan, in terms of stats, they're not actually that impressive, but if you put them in on the front line alongside Dol Amroth's sort of more standard units, they make a fantastic morale buffer, and of course being multiple HP makes them very hard to kill. They're a fantastic looking unit as well. Belfalas Marines up here as well. The main attraction with Dol Amroth's infantry, though, especially in comparison to Gondor's, is their heavy swordsmen. Heavy swordsmen are a kind of interesting unit. Like, they're very specialised, to be honest with you. Like, heavy swordsmen are very good in a melee fight against favourable opponents as long as they're not taking arrow fire, which is quite a rare situation to be in. Other than that, they can be a little bit finicky to use, but there's no doubting that Dol Amroth among the Western Kingdoms of Men have got arguably the strongest in that regard. Like, I would say maybe Arthedain have maybe got a claim on that as well. But the Haven Guard most certainly are the best heavy swordsmen in terms of the Kingdoms of Men outside of Numenor, of course, with their Pharazim Swordmasters. Haven Guard are more along the same sort of lines as the Temple Inquisitors. And a personal favourite of mine for Dol Amroth are the Perithil Champions, because they inspire fear in their enemies as well, which, when you're dealing a lot of damage, especially off the charge from the Perithil Champions, if a unit is already shaken when the champions charge into them, chances are it's going to break, especially in this situation where the attackers are all evil factions. None of them have really got especially fantastic morale, like Rhun have got morale that's okay, I suppose. And then there's also some cavalry as well, Perithil Riders, which at the very least will offer a little bit of mobility, and they're pretty decent in terms of the damage they can deal with their arrows as well. But I think that's just about it. There's some Wands of the White Tower and marksmen back here, as well as some veterans of Osgiliath at the very top of the settlement as well. But I will make a little bit of a cut, because the blue team probably will take a little bit of time before they're ready to really charge into the settlement. So I'll make a cut and rejoin when the battle begins. So, an interesting start to this game, as Khan do what they do best and move in with some mounted range units to try and poke and prod at the opponent first of all. But on this occasion it's not actually horse archers, it's their Brotherhood of the Wain. So the chariots, the things that are usually much better once they get rolling, are actually using their missiles first and foremost, which I actually agree with here, because the Gondor infantry is here. A ripe target indeed, obviously not the most important unit to go after, to be honest, but in this situation, I think, considering the fact they have very little in the way of support nearby, I don't actually think it's that bad of an idea. Obviously, each bolt that hits is almost a guaranteed kill as well, because the Brotherhood of the Wain have got fantastic missile damage. Crossbow bolts are, of course, AP, so the full plate armour of the Gondor infantry isn't really going to save them in that regard either. But yeah, just a single unit of Gondor infantry. Interesting to see that the archers didn't actually return fire. The chariots, of course, have got a lot of hit points. So it may not be the worst idea to sort of try and conserve your ammunition for the vast hordes that approach, as you can see over here. Interesting to see a unit of Variag warriors start to move all the way around. I can't imagine a single unit of Variag warriors is going to be all that important when it comes to going all the way around the map to try and get across the land bridge over here, because Dol Amroth, all they really need to do is keep a couple of units over here to make sure there isn't any flanking moves. But I think it is a good idea for Khan to send some units around, just because the best thing you can do when you're the attacker in this sort of situation, after all, is to try and stretch the defenders as much as you possibly can. And of course that is part of that, trying to exploit every opening that you can, even if it does take quite a while to get there. Variag mercenaries from the Vengeful One now moving onto the land bridge. I can only apologise for the loud drill noises that you can hear. Hopefully they subside soon. But yeah, Gondor infantry, shields pointing the right direction, both levels of armour upgrade. Like, to be honest with you, the Variag mercenaries are very unlikely to score much in the way of kills over here, and even if they do, the Gondorians won't be too concerned about that, because as much as trying to absorb a lot of the defenders' ammunition will be a concern for the attackers, the defenders will want to do the same as well. They'll want to make sure the attackers are not really able to skirmish to their fullest capabilities. Over here, meanwhile, interesting to see the chariots move in. One of the chariots did fall. Having said that, they also inflicted even more casualties than they already have done on this unit of Gondor infantry, which of course this will add up for the defenders. Like, they can't afford to take losses in this number for that long in this battle before it starts to become a really uphill struggle for them to win. But we shall see. Gondor infantry are here. Khandish army sort of how much are Khan actually sending over this way then? So it'll be quite a while before these troops actually have much of an impact on the battle, because doubtless they will just try and walk around. Actually, the Hwacha is going this way as well, which this is a relatively narrow passage, so I'm not surprised the Hwacha maybe isn't trying to exploit that. A little bit wider over here, and of course the Hwacha will be able to force Dol Amroth to retreat, so it's almost like a ticking clock, this, in many ways. Like this Khandish army, once it arrives, once the Hwacha gets in position, the defenders will be forced to pull back to the buildings of this makeshift CAIR Andros. The Orc fodder moving a pretty long way ahead of the rest of the Mordor army here, but thinking better of charging in, because obviously a unit of Gondor infantry may not be a unit which does its killing especially quickly against most units, but against Orc fodder it most certainly will. Meanwhile, the long, slow skirmish that Rhun are engaging in here will continue, and it's interesting that the Variag mercenaries have not yet had any returning salvos toward them, and you can see this is why Gondor, in this sort of situation, as long as they can control the situation, they are not really all that concerned about taking arrow fire like this. Basic archers are going to have a really hard time killing Gondorian troops in high numbers when you consider the shields and the armour that Gondorian troops come equipped with. So far so good. It'll be in melee where Gondor will start to be a little bit more worried about Rhun and Harad, because both of those factions of course have got very, very nice AP at their disposal. Over here, meanwhile, unlike on the other side where Khand are able to sort of get up onto a pathway and start pressuring the defenders, and on this side of things, Gondor are free to put their archers up here and not have to worry about them getting engaged by infantry. But Mordor so far haven't really committed themselves forward in numbers great enough to really justify using them, although Marksman CAIR Andros starting to fire, individual archers anyway, as Moradon infantry start moving in. What are they firing at? Are they firing at the Moradon infantry? I think they are. Or are there other units in here? No, they are. It's a pretty decent blob of Moradon infantry, to be fair, and unlike the Gondor infantry, the Orc armour and shields is obviously significantly less effective. Having said that, if Mordor are going to take arrow fire like this, they will much prefer it be on the Moradon infantry than some of their unshielded units like the Sauron's Will, for example, which of course can be very, very useful as well. Beasts of Gorgoroth getting up here, but there is no way up for them to try and flank the archers. Meanwhile, over on this side, Khand starting to put a little bit more pressure on. I think Khand, considering the fact that some of their army is already going around the side, they're definitely going to need the support of one of the Mordor armies. Y2Ks would be ideal to start putting pressure on this defence, because 2/3 of a Khandish army is not going to be enough to force their way through this choke point over here. They're definitely going to need the support and numbers that Mordor can provide them here. Good start, however, for Khand, putting the right kinds of pressure on the defences, and Dol Amroth are over here, which again, if I'm looking at this battle as a whole, I would much rather be facing off against Dol Amroth in a siege like this than Gondor. It's almost like they're drilling like right behind my head. It's most disconcerting. But the Gondor archers are starting to fire. Belfast Marines are here. And this is a pretty decent blob to be shooting into as well. Like, there's Orc fodder. To be fair, again, Nurad footmen with their shields and their armour, not going to be the easiest foe to shoot and kill, especially with a unit of basic Gondor archers. But it is still worth just sort of letting the attackers know that if they do come forward in a big blob, they will start taking damage. Meanwhile, Orc fodder still a relatively slow pace to this advance thus far, sort of feeling things out. Meanwhile, Variag mercenaries, at this point they've stopped firing, I think sensing the fact that they're not really going to be able to fulfill their function as an archer, which is primarily at home in a skirmish fight, and they're not really having the greatest of impact on the troops that are stationed over here. I think of the two, you know, like, the Southron Warband can maybe be sent forward from Harad, but I think the one that does need to take point over on this side is Rhun, purely because Rhun is just a little bit more durable than Harad. Like, Harad's armour is mostly made of like wood, at best, sort of like the chainmail and scale mail that the Serpent Guard have, which obviously is not quite as good as the gold metal shaped into sort of dragon scales that Rhun utilise. Well, still some Murad footmen. Belfast Marines actually taking damage in fairly decent quantities, to be honest. Nomadic infantry Looks as though there has been a bit of skirmishing back and forth between Dol Amroth and Karnd over here, but the nomadic infantry are going to get into position with their very colourful shields. It is interesting actually that Lango has decided not to move the Belfast Marines backwards, because they are very much in full view of any archers that would want to take a pop at them. And javelins, like, you know, Belfast Marines, like, they do have a shield, but their armour isn't like the best in comparison to a lot of other Western kingdoms. Around on archers starting to fire, but what are they firing at? I wonder. Yep, they're firing across as well, and the Belfast Marines are a good target to go after. They're out here in the open, they're a danger. Javelins, high damage of course. And the frontal phalanx, while you ideally would want to soften it up, like most players at this level of course know that you want to cover your phalanx units with sort of a shielded infantry unit and the Athlon men-at-arms upgraded, well shielded. You're not going to do an awful lot of damage over there, as Rhun have already found out. Meanwhile, Mordor starting to creep in a little bit closer. They do need to be careful. I mean, Y2K is moving forward now as well with some more support. They do need to be careful though, Mordor, that here. If they get a little bit too far ahead of themselves without appropriate support, I mean, these units I think are just about close enough that even if the initial attack does start to struggle, they should be able to get in there before it falls apart. But that is one of the main killers of attackers in 3rd Age Reforged. I'm actually glad to see as well that the Bulldogs are here. Tundra's Fox has got a quality unit which is ready to be committed right away. Like, another mistake a lot of attackers make is filtering in their units first, lowest quality first, and sort of a sliding scale up to their highest quality, but it's actually very rare that that's the right way to do it. You want to be a lot more mixed than that. You want to have some quality on the front right from the start to put some pressure on. Otherwise, initially, the defenders' units are going to be very, very comfortable against just Orc fodder. So I'm glad to see the Bulldogs there. Their armour piercing and their support will be very, very helpful against the Gondorians that they're arrayed against. But it is interesting. It's very much like the calm before the storm here. The only action happening thus far really has been the Brotherhood of the Wain doing a drive-by on the Gondor infantry and a little bit of damage done to this unit of Belfast Marines, which continues to wait on this hill. The tension is thick. Nomadic infantry have pulled out their scimitars and shields at this point. They can be out of ammunition though. Like, a skirmish arch like that's got far more ammunition than the nomadic infantry have used so far. Maybe the attackers are just waiting for this sort of Karndish detachment to sort of get into position on the other side of this land bridge as well. Nomadic warriors. I mean, there's some decent units they've sent over here. The Watcher is one of the main things I would say, but also the Brotherhood of the Axe. I mean, it's not as if Dol Amroth can afford to ignore this force, which is almost certainly the intention from Steward of Dale. Again, they need to try and pull the defenders as much as they can apart. And of course, this means that they will be getting attacked from 4 directions, but the Karndish detachment over there, of course, will be the weakest push, so it's all about how well the defenders can judge this as well. Rhun continuing to just sort of hang out. Let's go to ×2 speed. I am curious. Here we go. I must be blind. As the Orc fodder do move in, Rhun on infantry moving in, as well as the Bulldogs, which of course, just against Orc fodder, this unit of Gondor infantry would be pretty comfortable. But with the support from the numbers of them around on infantry and, you know, mainly the Bulldogs because of their AP, the Gondor infantry will find themselves outmatched here. So the first melee engagement does begin. The Gondorian troops in their natural environment trying to hold the line. But support is going to need to be forthcoming here, whether it's more units in melee or whether it's from archers or javelins. Because, I mean, Mordor are not going to run out of manpower anytime soon. That's the one thing you can bet on when you're facing off against Mordor. Like, they're not going to go down quickly in terms of kills. You might be able to rout them quickly, but even in this situation it's quite unlikely. Fountain Guard are moving forward. A good unit to bring in support, although they're just running away again now. Which is interesting. I mean, this unit of Gondor infantry is going to lose. They're shaken. It's a very interesting decision to pull back there with the Fountain Guard. I personally would have committed them. Because now this unit of Gondor infantry is going to go down ever more quickly. And I think it's quite early to give up on this choke point, you know. It's a nice narrow choke point you've got over here. He's coming back in now. Eclipse needs to make up his mind of what he's going to do here. Like, there's really no room for indecision when you're on the defence like this. Over here, meanwhile, nomadic marauders have been absolutely destroyed on this side, to be fair, by the Tirithea marksmen. Much more like it from Lango. And a nice charge coming in from the Parathil Riders as well, which will be enough to finish off this unit of nomadic marauders. Like I said, It's not the end of the world when you lose a unit of javelins like this for not an awful lot of return. Like, the javelins have done a little bit of damage to the troops on the front line, but nothing extensive. I mean, some decent kills. I would say that they haven't quite paid for themselves based on that, but they don't necessarily need to. Like I said, very cheap unit, not exactly that important to their efforts. Meanwhile, a big push coming across now, the runic chariots forcing their way to the front, running over their own allies. None of them will die, of course, but it still looks quite comical. Ooh, hello, a little bit of a path over here as well, and it's looking like already, actually, the defenders are thinking about pulling back to the higher ground, which is very interesting. But I feel as though Eclipse made this decision earlier, and that's why there was that indecision. The problem with doing this, however, is you're going to need to leave a rear guard, which means units are going to be left behind and they're going to be overwhelmed and killed. I think that's very early to pull back, to be honest with you. Like, it is a wide area to cover, but these are decent choke points you've got access to, and to be honest with you, the widest choke point, Dole Amroth's, they were pretty comfortable in right from the start, so I think a little bit premature, this retreat. And this is exactly what the attackers are going to want here. They're going to be able to charge forwards. There's no need to avoid the stakes with the Brotherhood of the Wain. They are an elephant class unit, so when they hit stakes from the front, unlike standard cavalry, they won't actually die, they will destroy the stakes. So, very nice little bit of functionality they've got there. They did hit the halberds, however, and as soon as the halberds start hitting, of course, that's not going to be good for our brave chariots. The Brotherhood of the Wain charging in here, taking some damage immediately from the Gondorian archers. But yeah, I'm very surprised the defenders decided to retreat immediately. If they were going to do this, they should have started doing it far sooner, to be honest with you. Bit of a mistake, and in this sort of situation, if you're the defenders and you make a fairly significant mistake like that, it can be quite difficult to come back from. It may not look like much, but when you start taking unnecessary losses, it can be very difficult. In Lothian Honour Guard, you can see that this unit of Gondor infantry, which was still acting as the Honour Guard, very easily being cut down by the Mordor orcs as they continue to move forwards. Gondor infantry doing their thing and dying for the cause. So Rhun and Harad need to be kind of careful here. They are in danger of bunching themselves up, overly bunching themselves up, I would say, on this sort of long snaking pathway that leads right to the top layer. So a very multifaceted map this, and still, it must be said, the defenders are continuing to retreat. Again, I'm a little bit... I do feel as though this was a bit soon, because I mean, we're seeing several examples here of the attackers taking ruthless advantage of the gaps that inevitably appear when you pull back in a largely uncoordinated retreat. Well, uncoordinated is not the right word. Rapid retreat. They pulled back everything almost all at once, leaving very limited numbers as a rear guard. Gaps were always going to appear, and the chariots, while the chariots are dying in high numbers, look at the carnage they're causing. Like, having gaps appear like that is exactly the sort of thing that chariots want to see. And, yeah, defenders paying dearly for their decision there, you have to say. Paratil riders are still here, in and amongst the enemy lines, and these units over here have been left behind as well. This unit of Belfalas Marines has had no luck in this fight whatsoever. Initially they were being used as cannon fodder for the archers, and now they've been left behind following the retreat. It's a very weird retreat, that. Like, I would be interested to hear what the thinking of the defenders actually was there, because I don't agree with that at all. I think that was very shoddily executed. If they were going to do that, they should have started doing it far sooner. And there is a danger here that the attackers get a little bit too greedy. Like, they're moving forward with a mass pushing unit immediately here, which... Ooh, what's going on there? That was a shaky frame rate, which makes me believe there could be Rangers about. I don't want to zoom in on something if there are Rangers nearby, which, to be fair, if there are Rangers nearby, I mean, a blob like this that will inevitably form is probably one of the best things they can take advantage of. But the attackers now, if I were the attackers now, I would slow the assault down. Like, you've already made some good gains. There's no need to rush things. You've got a bit of an advantage. You can afford to take your time. Charging forward with the Olag Kai, the Nurad footmen, like, they're putting the pressure on. And to be fair, once again, there are some kills to be had because this unit of Gondor infantry is in front of the other units, which means they're going to be easy pickings for a unit like the Olag Kai. they're going to need the support of something a little bit more substantial, like the Halberdiers and the Fountain Guard, if they're going to have much hope. I mean, they're trying to utilise their javelins here, which is the right thing to do, to be fair, from the defenders, trying to make use of just this one choke point, and maybe that was it. Maybe they're sneakily trying to justify condensing the attackers down into just the one choke point by purposely taking some losses. That would be some real 4D chess. Well, there goes Harad's general. A very swift demise it was for him. This Gondorian front line will fall eventually. Ooh. I think I zoomed out just in time there as the Warns of Minas Ithil open up. The Athenian Rangers are on their way over as well, so I mean this could be painful for Harad. Like, they're going to do a lot of damage in melee, thanks to their armour piercing of course, but all Gondor need to do is hold that big blob back long enough for the Warns of Minas Ithil and the standard Athenian Rangers just in behind to get the damage done that they want to. And to be fair, Rangers are capable of doing damage quickly enough that I think there's not too much danger of that happening, and they can even spread out their efforts in that regard. Athenian Rangers moving in. Marksmen of CAIR ANDROS are actually being engaged in melee a little bit. Tirithea marksmen, still the trolls doing their thing. Orc javelins in position now as well. Do the defenders really have anything that can respond to this? The last thing you want as the defenders are attackers being able to get good value with their javelins. If anything, the attackers have invested a little bit too much in their cheap javelins. It may seem like a bit of a given to bring them along, but only a couple of factions really need to invest heavily in them, I think. The rest should sort of go a little bit more up front with their infantry investment. It could be that a couple of units of Eastron Clansmen, for example, may have been a wiser pick in the long run. Meanwhile, this unit of Belfast Marines is continuing to be bullied as the Olag High continue to chase them down. It's very unlikely they will be returning to the fold anytime soon. The Khandish forces, which went all the way around with the probable expectation that they would be fighting down here first and foremost, they're just going to be able to walk right on in and instead start thinking about setting up that. To be fair, like, one thing that the defenders have avoided by retreating to this layer early is the fact that Hwacha is now going to struggle to get a good angle. I think, like, the Hwacha very much prefers to be fighting on the level. It's kind of an interesting unit to work out the specifics of the Hwacha, but I don't think the Hwacha is going to have necessarily the best of times trying to shoot up this choke point. They're more likely to do catastrophic damage to their own men, more so than anything else. Black Swan Renegades moving onto the front line to support the Athelond men-at-arms, the Guards of Osgiliath and the Citadel Guard, so some really high quality units, both defence and offence based. Good AP for the defenders as well, which will be useful against Mordor. Most of their very basic units, like the Morannon infantry for example, don't have an awful lot in terms of their melee capabilities. Their armour is really where most of their defence comes from, and they're already taking a lot of damage. The Olag High are doing their best, but I think now what the attackers need to do is just sort of reorganise themselves, get ready, just sort of engage the attackers a little bit more comprehensively than this, and then try to use their ranged units to slowly but surely wear this defence down. I think that is the key. Athenian Rangers are back here, just having a look at the reinforcements. There's a lot of pole arms. The Athenian Rangers are in position, and they do have a pretty decent shot as well. I mean, this is the danger, obviously, when you're the attackers in this sort of situation. It's inevitable that the defenders are going to try and use Rangers against you, because the kill counts they're capable of getting are just too good to ignore. Oh my. Well, things did not go very well for the Muma kill, but interestingly enough, this also acts in favour of the defenders, because Muma kill corpses, unlike most entities like this, they are solid when they die. So this is almost like a makeshift wall at this point, and what the attackers have done by committing forward the Muma kill into this situation where there were Fountain Guard, there were Rangers firing into them, lots of damage being done very, very quickly, what they've done is artificially made the choke point smaller. So that certainly plays into the hands of the defenders. So a bit of a lucky break there. I mean, it could have been intentional, that, to sort of lure the Muma kill in and then use their corpses as a cover. It's the sort of thing which most players who play the game are very much aware of. So I'm going to go ahead and say that was intentional. It was interesting that Mr. Sneakman decided to commit forward his Muma kill that early into an area of the battlefield that had Fountain Guard. There is actually a little pathway that leads down here as well, so more reinforcements on their way over. Some Black Swan Renegades, 2 units of them actually. AP units against... I mean, to be fair, Harad have already taken some horrendous losses in this choke point over here. I think Harad, what they wanted to do was bust through quickly. they have failed in that endeavour, most certainly. I suppose with some Moran infantry heading over here, some AP, and Rhun are not exactly the most lightly armoured faction in the world, so those maces should be useful. CAIR ANDROS marksmen continuing to fire, but also taking some counter fire from lower down, from actually the Eastron crossbowmen, as well as some archers as well. Standard arrow fire is not going to be too much of a concern for the marksmen of CAIR ANDROS, like most higher tier Gondorian units like this. Their armour values are very impressive, so they won't have to worry too much about that sort of thing. But the crossbow bolts, of course, are a different matter. Athlon men at arms. Athenian Rangers are popping in and out. I really need to keep an eye on that, because if I'm zoomed in on a blob when the Rangers start firing, that's a big rip. Blackguard of Barad-dûr moving in. Round on archers, coming forwards, looks like they're out of ammunition, so continuing to keep up the assault. And I have to say, the defenders have done a pretty good job at sort of making up for the losses they've taken already. They still need to do more, I think, to sort of make sure they continue to gain those losses back. But a good start. Brotherhood of the Spear on the front line. A very good unit in melee, a very, obviously higher end spears obviously do really tend to be very impressive defensively, but they need a few more units around them, in my opinion. A little bit isolated on the front, and if they get isolated by stuff like Fountain Guard, that's going to be very, very poor for them. Still a lot of archers in behind here, which of course was always going to be the main focus of the defenders. Gondor archers here, continuing to fire in. Belfast Marines, another unit of Belfast Marines. Hopefully this one doesn't suffer the same fate as the ones that were left behind. But they're here, clutching their javelins, ready to do their bit when necessary. More units being committed forward now. A real bloodbath for the attackers. This is probably more what the attackers were expecting to deal with on the initial choke points, but as it is, that's a lot of damage being done there. Nomadic warriors throwing in their javelins around on archers. This is another very interesting unit to have on the attack. Obviously, Adunheim Shadowbows and Athenian Rangers popping in and out all the while, both taking pot shots into the blobs of infantry that the other side has amassed against them. If the attackers, I would be willing to say 9 times out of 10, if the attackers can get good value off with Rangers, it's very difficult for the defenders to come back from that sort of thing. Beasts of Gorgoroth are over here. That's a bold move considering the fate of the Mumakil over here, but Rhun pushing up onto this hill now. You can see 2 armour-piercing line infantry units fighting off against one another. The Flag Rim against the Black Swan Renegades. I would say overall, oh god, again the Rangers. I'm amazed I've avoided a crash so far because I've been zoomed in on blobs when the Rangers have opened up on them. Later on in the battle we won't have to worry about this sort of thing when the Rangers are out of ammunition. Under normal circumstances I actually rate the Flag Rim more highly than the Black Swans because the cost efficiency for the Flag Rim is higher. Very similar kinds of units in terms of what they offer, but the Flag Rim just do it for less. But with Ranger support, that's obviously a very, very different matter. More marksmen. Be interesting to see how much punishment the defenders can take. They've got plenty of reinforcements, to be fair, plenty of reserves. A lot of archers at their disposal as well. Athenian Rangers. Over here you can see the attackers are now starting to push back against the initial defence. The Hwacha from on high. Wanderers of Nimrodal have taken a ton of damage, presumably from archers. They're now going to continue to do so against the Hwacha. Interestingly enough, at this distance and angle, the Hwacha, and considering how spread out the defenders actually are, the Hwacha may not be as devastating as it could be, but it's certainly not the worst idea to just go after a unit like the Dismounted Knights, the Silver Swan. A very useful unit to use on the defence, and I think at this point the defenders are thinking about shifting back to the next layer once again, albeit this time... Well, it is interesting. I think actually there is only one choke point that leads up to the next layer through the main route of the settlement. There's sort of one more that leads up here, but to get to the final layer you kind of have to take a sort of serpentine path up here, or you try and take the back route. But the back route has not been very lucrative for the attackers so far. The Rangers have really made life very, very difficult for them, and the joint efforts of Gondor and Dol Amroth have been largely successful at holding them at bay. And with Fountain Guard and Guards of Osgiliath over here, the Gamp Rim and the Flag Rim are not going to have much more luck either. Athenian Rangers now sort of shifting their priorities back over here, and as they probably should. To be fair, the Mumakil don't just make it awkward to attack, they do kind of make it a little bit more awkward to organise a defence as well, as can be seen here as Rhun start to squeeze through some of the gaps and start to find some purchase on the Gondorian Dol Amroth front line. And there are still plenty of runic troops as well, but Rhun and Harad have definitely had a very rough time of it. Harad especially got massacred going through here. Very, very rough for them. Meanwhile, Ballista getting a good angle here. Very nice positioning here from Eclipse with the Ballista. They do have a decent shot. Some of their shots are of course going to land short or hit the house, but some of them will hit centre mass of those units over there. A lot of routing going on actually from the defenders and the attackers, which of course means some friendly fire. But also, as we can see here, Marksmen of CAIR Andros firing away, Veterans of Osgiliath firing away. I'm going to take my life into my hands and get a little bit closer to the action. Perithal Champions moving forward, but seeing that the Olag High overextended themselves a bit, this isn't necessarily the worst thing. Perithal Champions are the kind of unit after all which can be quite effective against trolls. The Belfast Marines trying to chip in melee as well. Bringing down powerful units like the Olag High going to be very necessary for the defenders if they're going to have any hope of winning this fight, considering the massive numbers discrepancy there would have been at the start. But still, archers doing their thing. Watcher trying to get some kills as these units retreat. And nice hit there into the centre mass of the Perithal Champions. The house taking a few of those rockets as well. Again, the Watcher is kind of like this. Like you don't really notice the damage the Watcher's doing until later on in the fight. It's a very sort of hit and miss kind of siege weapon, but I really like the Watcher, obviously. But I actually prefer, it's one of those weird pieces of siege equipment where I actually much prefer it on an open field, because you can really dictate the pace of a fight on the open field with the Watcher if your opponent, especially if your opponent hasn't really prepared for it. Olag High moving in, getting in but beyond the Perithal Champions and continuing to go after the Belfast Marines and this very depleted unit of Gondor archers, so not great for them. And a large part of that, I think, is because there was another unit of Blackguard that was committed forward. Are the Rangers firing again? 12 Wanderers of Nimrodal, that's not the end of the world, I suppose. Perithal Champions trying to hold the monstrous hordes at bay, but there's only so much they're going to be able to do, especially now that enemy javelins are going to be able to get in behind enemy lines and start throwing in there. But definitely a very costly push from the attackers, but they'll take it, I think. Considering the good fortune they had earlier on, I think they'll be all too happy to incur some losses. It's been over here where I think the defenders have had the most success, because the attackers really haven't been able to make much happen over here at all. The Baltross Sapphire Bladesmen are going to try and rectify that. They have a decent shot in there, but I mean, just having a look at this front line. Fountain Guard, Black Swan Renegades, tons of really strong AP troops. But Rhun, with that javelin support and with a few units now able to get into the side of this front line, slowly but surely the Easterlings are starting to make a little bit of progress. Slowly but surely is going to be the name of the game here, I think. Let's see here. Just making sure there are no Rangers still taking pot shots. A few more units coming over in support. Hashari Shadows, I mean, Harad do still have a few units that were committed towards the centre, but certainly their army is much more depleted than the other attackers today. But Hashari Shadows, mounted Rangers, for all intents and purposes, just Rangers at this point, able to support whatever side of the battle needs it most. Still a lot of arrow fire coming in, but just look at all the bodies down here now. Some of the Blackguard of Barad-dûr just finishing off some of the Ravenhelms and Ethelon men-at-arms that were trying to hold on to the front line, but of course this front line has now fallen, the attackers continuing to move forward, so one layer of the main settlement conquered. Just 2 more to go before victory. It's a long road to the top though, and there's still a long way to go in this fight. Moran Halberds are there. Beasts of Gorgoroth are completely healthy. I mean, that is something the attackers have. They may have lost the Mumakil, but they still have the diet version of the Mumakil with the Beasts of Gorgoroth. Wardens of Minas Ithil getting a little bit further forwards. Hashari Shadow is actually able to squeeze through the Mumakil. Maybe they'll be able to put some pressure on from behind here. Ooh. I think maybe Eclipse has been caught out here. Maybe not expecting the Hashari Shadows to come in here. And the Ballista crew is now going to be engaged by the Horse Archers. Having said that, there aren't enough Horse Archers to actually outright defeat the Ballista crew in melee, I don't think. And also, there's a unit of Citadel Guard on the way to support. But even so, this will give him something to think about, because the Ballista certainly hasn't used up all its ammunition yet, I would hazard a guess. And they're definitely going to want to shoot the Ballista down this very narrow approach as Rhun now start to try and make their way up here I don't know whether Rhun have got the manpower to attack immediately, but to be honest, they're going to need to. Otherwise, the ballista is just going to tee off into them. But yeah, very, very definitely what the attackers wanted. This it is interesting as well to get up onto this grass verge over here. I can't actually see how you get up onto this thing. I assume it must be this over here, and you just run right the way along it. But that, of course, means that these Rangers are going to be free to shoot into the attackers as they move forward. But I mean, that ballista is going to be pretty gnarly. The second battle line has been drawn, and so far, of course, to start with, the defenders have got a fairly substantial advantage. Once again, a ton of long, sharp sticks are their primary weapon of choice. Guards of Osgiliath and Fountain Guard fighting together. Units of line infantry in amongst there as well. Veterans of Osgiliath, certainly capable of looking after themselves in melee. Moran on infantry. Veriag warriors, they're shaken, going to need more support. Some more serious units from the attackers coming forward now in the shape of the Brotherhood of the Axe. Veterans of Osgiliath are firing. Not the best angle for archers, but they're actually going after the javelins, which is not the worst idea. They may have a shield, but it's a very poor quality shield. Their armour is also very bad. And you need to stop these javelins from firing. Although the Adunheim shadow bows are a much more important target to go after, to be honest. But they're going to go around here. Is there another pathway up and around here? There is, you know. Another little route, and I'm not sure the defenders have actually taken notice of this. The Beasts of Gorgoroth are going around. They're going to have Sauron's will to back them up as well. But unfortunately, using the Beasts of Gorgoroth means that you kind of surrender the element of surprise. They are not the most subtle unit. They're going to be seen, and indeed Gondor have now seen them. But 2 choke points rather than just 1, which is probably not what the defenders were hoping for. And that in and of itself means the defenders... This defensive position here has got a much shorter shelf life than they probably were hoping it would. Meanwhile, not sure whether the ballista has done the damage going forward. I can't see a huge trail of crispy corpses, so I'm going to assume not. You'd think it's point blank, but some of these artillery pieces are not ideally positioned. But Gondor are holding. Citadel Guard on the front line, backed up by some Gondor infantry, but Rhun are here in force. Like, Rhun have got some momentum now. Like, for a long time in this battle, Rhun and Harad were really taking a lot of damage. It was really tough for them, but now Rhun has managed to gain some momentum, and they are effectively attacking the final layer of this defence. Whether they will be successful or not, only time will tell. Marksmen of CAIR Andros out of ammunition. Perithil champions, for all intents and purposes, 2 heavy swordsman units. Differing qualities perhaps. 3 heavy swordsman units actually, and Haven Guard. Serious unit indeed. So even if Rhun do start to make some headway, those 3 units will be committed, and with the base damage and melee defense they have, that's the sort of things that you want to be using against Rhun. Sauron's will, moving forward. It's interesting to see the Gondor infantry take point against them, because it's exactly the kind of unit the Sauron's will is going to enjoy fighting. An armour-piercing shock infantry unit going up against a line infantry unit whose primary method of defence is their armour. Exactly what they want to face off against. Just having a look in behind as well, we can see the Fountain Guard. They're going to trudge in. I mean, this is a little bit more like it. Like the Fountain Guard, they won't particularly enjoy being in melee against an AP heavy axeman either. But their phalanx, and just as a unit overall, they are more impressive than the Sauron's will, so this will turn this fight back in the favour of the defenders. Interesting to see. Well, the Beasts of Gorgoroth are not there anymore. But the Beasts of Gorgoroth did move in here. They moved right up the middle, actually. They moved backwards and then moved up. But you can see, once again, I kind of missed the push from the War Beasts. The Mumakil and the Beasts of Gorgoroth, I looked away for 1 minute and then they were all dead, which I think is probably a cautionary tale about using them. Like, there's perhaps a reason why they aren't used as much as you would expect. Like, to be fair, I haven't seen Harad used in a replay in quite some time. But for Mordor, like, there's a reason why the Beasts of Gorgoroth are not used as much, and that is because, much like Trolls and Chariots, if they're misused, they're deceptively fragile. And going right up through the middle here against a faction which has got as many anti-cavalry options as Gondor is always going to be risky. And also with range support as well. All of that damage is going to add up pretty quickly. Trying to go up through the middle. But to be fair, the Beasts of Gorgoroth, in spite of their demise, they did very clearly leave a gap right in the middle of the defence, and the attackers are taking advantage of that. Trolls are following through with it. The Nurad Storm Guard are moving forward, which obviously a very serious unit. There are Bulldogs in there. The Nurad Halberds taking point, as well as Moran on Halberds. That is interesting though. The fact that Halberds are being sent forwards kind of suggests to me that they're running out of shielded infantry units, and considering the fact the defenders do still have ammunition, that is a potential worry. But the defenders are also running out of men to actually man the front lines at this point. They are sending over some more reinforcements now. Tirithea marksmen shooting relatively close by. But we have Nimlothian Honour Guard, we have Ravenhelms. Good infantry units, but are they going to be committed forward quickly? Because if they're not, this front line will fall. So sooner rather than later is the name of the game here. These Olakai are very depleted at this point. So much so the Tirithea marksmen can probably overcome them in melee, even if they do take losses. I would still be fairly tempted to send the Ravenhelms in quickly to just sort of charge them and make sure of that though, and then peel off. But yeah, maybe a little bit of a delay there on the infantry being committed. In come the Ravenhelms. Big charge there from their Zweihanders. In come the Nimlothian Honour Guard as well. Nice, nice, nice. But numbers would be my main concern here. More Halberds are coming forward, Adunheim Shadowbows, that's the thing, like, unless there are more reinforcements on their way down here, I think this is just going to delay the inevitable, to be honest with you. Like, this unit of Gondor infantry is being pulled apart by Storm Guard and Temple Executioners. This is the sort of period of the battle where we've seen quite a lot of like the upper end defensive units, but now, more so because they have little choice with the amount of losses they've taken already, we're going to start to see more quality units from the attackers, and it's whether or not the defenders have got what it takes to actually deal with that. Do they have what it takes to stop Rhun? It's looking like the answer to that is yes. Rhun with Citadel Guard, Gondor infantry. The heavy swordsmen were here at one point as well, because I saw them actually pull back off the front line again. Athenian Rangers shooting fairly close by as well. So Rhun, they had momentum for a little while, but Gondor took it away from them again, and Rhun are stuck. But all they need to do is keep fighting Rhun for long enough for the rest of them to continue to move up through the main portion of the settlement. Hwacha firing away. No hits though. Rockets bouncing all over the place, but you can see actually the collateral damage the Hwacha has actually caused to this top portion of the settlement, because the buildings are burning. More reinforcements have made their way down, interestingly enough. Another unit of veterans of Osgiliath, again, not to be taken lightly in melee. They're not exactly the powerhouses that Gondor can commit, but you can see here that maybe a little bit of a half-hearted committal of some of these units, expecting to be able to smash through for cheaper than they ultimately have been able to do, and all of a sudden Gondor look like they're going to hold on over here. Fountain Guard turning around to help the Gondor infantry. The Gondor infantry over there holding on like heroes. They're broken and almost completely dead at this point, but they held the attackers back long enough for the Fountain Guard to get back over here. But some javelins into the back. There goes, I think that was Mordor's general actually, because that looked like Nazgul. Orc javelins trying to throw into the backs of those Fountain Guard, but of course by doing so they're almost completely ignoring the Gondor infantry that's killing them. So that, I mean, they're doing good damage to the Fountain Guard, to be honest with you, so it's definitely worthwhile. And shooting armor-piercing javelins into the back of Fountain Guard, exactly what you want to be doing if you are Mordor. You've also got the Demons of the Desert there, which that could be devastation, but there's no real need to shoot into the Fountain Guard at this point. But the rest of the Gondorian line doing quite well for itself. Temple Executioners are in and amongst things. With the armour upgrade, they're a very scary unit to try and face. And there are Nimlothian Honour Guard over here, which are armour piercing, of course, veterans of Osgiliath, but if the Temple Executioners get support, they're always one of those units that you would back in most fights, and this one is no different. But they're not getting support, that's the thing. Like, I'm actually concerned for the attackers here. Like, do they have the numbers? And having a look at this, I actually don't think they do. Temple Guard shooting point blank into the Ravenhelms, which of course is going to do some decent damage, but they are going to get engaged in melee. Temple Guard should still win that fight, of course, but Gondor preventing those AP arrows from finding their marks. I think Gondor have got this. I think the defenders, just in general, as we sort of get into the final phases, the attackers do still have units, but look at this, like there's units that are stuck on the Mumakil, just in and amongst things there. Not a huge amount of troops, but still could be significant. Balchos Sapphire Bladesmen moving back around to link up. Dragon's Wrath Warlords. Yeah, I'm feeling good about the defenders' chances here. They've managed to bleed the attackers enough in those choke points, which of course comes down to their enormous amount of archer power in this battle. I was worried for them when they retreated and made a bit of a hash of it at the start, but ultimately it was well thought out, because condensing the defence down into just 2 choke points rather than 4 meant they could focus their firepower much more efficiently. And that has ended up making a big difference in this fight. The Flag Rim are going to burn themselves out. I'm amazed Rhun have actually carried on fighting as long as they have, to be honest with you, because them and Harad really took the brunt of that range of fire and, you know, very narrow choke point they had. Over here, meanwhile, Gondor infantry are routing. Again, in spite of the fact that they've been really pulled all over the place, the Nurad Storm Guard are still here. A real thorn in the side of the defenders here. There may only be a smaller amount of them. Here you can see what's going on there. That was Demons of the Desert, surely. Doing damage to the Nimlothians, trying to help save the Temple Executioners. I mean, this battle isn't over. I just feel, based on how limited the attacking manpower now is, as long as the defenders continue to play as they have done up until this point, I think they should be okay. And it's not as if they're out of quality either. They've still got Nimlothian Honor Guard and Haven Guard and more Raven Helms. Although, to be fair, I mean, it's not a huge army, is it? Both sides have really done substantial damage to one another. The Citadel Guard actually being retreated. Rhun, yeah, the Gondor infantry routing has a big break. Could the attackers win? Maybe I was over-egging how much the defenders had left. I mean, these Athenian Rangers as well. This could be a massive mistake, to be honest with you, depending on how much ammunition they still have left. I mean, it's possible, to be fair, they don't have that much ammo left, in which case it's actually not that much of a blunder. But if they do have a lot of ammunition left, like, you cannot allow your Rangers, which at this point are your best chance at winning the battle, to be charged down by Dragon's Wrath Warlords. They're actually quite fortunate that that charge was not very good. If they had got their lances down and got up to charge speed, that unit of Rangers would have been gone. Hefty charge it could have been, but in the end, not punished for that as much as they could have been, really, because even if they are very low on ammunition, like, that unit of Athenian Rangers in melee could be the difference between victory and defeat at this point. In come the Demons of the Desert with the Temple Executioners, finishing off the units that are still fighting down here on this layer. If they still have ammunition, the Demons of the Desert could be a real difference maker as well. Nimlothian Honor Guard standing and fighting oh, excuse me, to the bitter end. In melee here, the Temple Guard. Yeah, I mean, the Nimlothian Honor Guard are obviously very difficult to break. I'm actually kind of surprised they're not locked morale, but inevitably, well, obviously they're not. But they held on for a long time, to be fair. That was the Mordor General. Or Rhun. Well, that Mordor and Rhun General are now gone. One of the defending armies is gone, which I think is Viper Action. Yeah, it is. So Eclipse and Lango, the only 2 defending armies left. One of the Gondorian armies completely destroyed. But now, CAIR Andros Marksmen over here. Again, a matter of numbers. Like Rhun, their infantry very much on its last leg, so this should be all it takes to finally finish off this assault. But if they can keep it going for just a little bit longer, occupy these units over here as long as possible, and you can tell actually the defenders are very eager to finish them off completely so they can concentrate their force on a single choke point. So they sent the Haven Guard over here, and of course that means that finally the Runic Infantry is going to have its push stopped. But got to give credit to the Vengeful One there. Despite a rough hand being dealt to him, he kept that attack going for about as long as he could be expected to, which sometimes is all you can do as the attacker. Nurad Storm Guard here. Watcher Crew is forward, but of course the artillery piece has long since run out of ammunition. This is the thing to be concerned about. Mr. Sneakman has had a very rough battle, to be fair. Much like the Vengeful One, only he took the full fury of those Rangers, and his Mumakil were not able to smash the line in the way that he obviously hoped, but he could still be the match winner for his team here. These Demons of the Desert, if they still have ammunition, a couple of well-placed volleys could put this beyond the defenders at this point. Even just in melee, to be honest with you, the Demons of the Desert are going to be very scary. Not quite so much maybe as Temple Guard or Temple Executioners. This is an important unit as well. A Dunine Shadowbow is only 22. We're at that point in the battle where even smaller units, like the ones that are on display, could be absolutely key. Could the Dragon's Wrath Warlords be the big difference makers? They could be, because they've got a free charge now on the Parathil Champions. Lango, I think, is going to see that, and he's going to try and wriggle away, but he's going to try and sort of pull them into the Nimlothian Honor Guard, but they are going to get through. Again, the charge, not bad, but not amazing either, and pulling back through the Nimlothian Honor Guard is going to take a real toll on the Warlords, unless they get very fortunate, which it looks as though they did. They're a very durable unit of cavalry, to be fair, the Dragon's Wrath Warlords. They're not as quick as something like the Black Serpents, or the, what's the other one? What's the other multiple HP Lancer that's quick? There is another one. First Marshal's Bodyguard. Those two are quick. You know, they are a little slower, but they are very durable. 2-9 Shadow Bows. Always a little bit worried when Rangers do that, and I'm zoomed in reasonably close, but very nice angle on that shot. And to be honest with you, it's the sort of thing which will force the rest of these defenders to move forward. Can they really afford the Nimlothian Honor Guard to fight here unsupported? Maybe they can. We shall see. And still, Nazgul over here. There goes the Khandish General. This one Nazgul is occupying an entire unit of Haven Guard. Again, could that be the thing that makes the difference? 'Tis possible. This ballista is still mounted, but I'm not sure whether it still has ammunition or not. Some decent units the defenders still have left. A lot of them are heavy swordsmen as well, which at this late stage, when there's much less in the way of archers to deal with them, is exactly the kind of unit you want. Demons of the Desert, I think they may actually be out of ammunition, but even so, their abilities in melee, I think, are going to be very key here. And now they're going to surround the Nimlothian Honor Guard, which this is going to be the end of the brave Gondorian warriors on the front, unless support is forthcoming, which I don't think it is. In fact, I think the Dragon's Wrath Warlords are going to try and take the initiative and maybe charge in and deal some damage to the Ravenhelms here. Ravenhelms or Parathil Champions? Parathil Champions, in my opinion, are the stronger unit, but because of the fear causing effect. But the Ravenhelms are stronger in number at this point. Numbers are one of the most important factors, of course, and in a real battle situation, numbers fluctuate so much. Yeah, those Nimlothians. Well, there goes the Runic General. So who was the other general then? It must have been 2 Mordor generals that went around that way. Wild. Well, no ranged units left for the attackers, although Balchor Sapphire Bladesman... Yeah, I think the attackers... I thought the defenders had more than they had, inevitably. Well, obviously, but... I don't know why I keep mixing those two words up. They're nothing alike. But I think the quality of some of these attacking infantry units at this point is going to be a problem. Like Temple Guard, Balchor Sapphire Bladesman... Demons of the Desert in melee, although they're taking a lot of damage. That downhill charge from the Parathil Champions, very effective. And to be fair, in spite of being completely surrounded, the Nimlothian Honor Guard, absolute heroes on the front line. Eclipse's General, leading by example very much, and I mean, this is a close one. Again, I'm tempted to actually say now the defenders should go on to win it, because the attackers, I thought they would be able to dismantle that unit of Nimlothian Honor Guard and then keep the momentum going forward. I'm not sure anymore, because I mean, look at this. I mean, Dol Amroth have got the Haven Guard still in reserve, and at this point, the Temple Executioners, the unit which compared to them compares fair, you know, pretty much the direct comparison, is now mostly gone. Except, well, I say mostly gone, 17, but a good charge into the Parathil Champions from what's left of the Dragon's Wrath Warlords. Another charge. They're just trying to kill as many as they can with charges before they're inevitably destroyed, which is going to be now, because they're going to have to try and pull through all of these heavy swordsmen. There's a lot of damage swinging around there. Honestly, at this point, if I were the defenders, I would just commit everything in. There are gaps here. Try and stop these Rangers from firing. Swarm over them with all your heavy swordsmen. The Temple Guard are here. Pretty scary unit. Balchor Sapphire Bladesmen are in here, but yeah, I think the defenders have it, you know. It's been a very competitive battle, this, though. And again, it's one of those instances where I don't think anyone really played poorly. I think maybe Rhun and Harad, I think, again, that was more just maybe a little bit too much aggression. Like, considering the situation, it was just a rough hand they were dealt. But you couldn't really say they played poorly, because it was, in many situations, that would be the right thing to do. Parathil Champions chasing the Rangers off. At the very least, they're making the Rangers have a little bit less favourable of an angle. Citadel Champions now, however, are trying to duel with Temple Guard, which is not great for them, but they're immediately going to get the backup of the Haven Guard as well, which this very much is. Those Nimlothians, though. That's exactly the reason why they're my favourite unit of Gondorian infantry. They have just got so much holding power. And that AP that they have means that in melee, honestly, they're still killing machines. So it's not even as if the Spear Malice, in comparison to the ones of the White Tower and the Vanguard of King Alisar, is too much of a problem, to be honest. Really, really powerful unit for Gondor, and it may end up being that that holding power is what has given them the win. Confirmed it for them. The Adunheim Shadow Bows are pretty much the last hope for the attacks at this point, but I just don't think they're going to be able to deal damage quickly enough. Most of the units that are left, even if they are heavy swordsmen, have got the armour values to tank enough damage while they dismantle what's left of this attacking front line. Beltrol Sapphire Bladesmen just being overwhelmed on the front line at this point. Temple Guard victory almost a certainty. They're going to carry on firing. But again, you can see here the Temple Guard are going to do their best, but it's the difference between having an archer that's really strong in melee compared to a unit that is dedicated to being in melee.
I cannot believe my eyes. Our warriors have turned into old women and run from the enemy.
Well, Khan'da gone, so that means the final Storm Guardsmen on the front line were killed, but it does go to show their power as well. Like they stood and fought for a long time as well. A very impressive infantry unit that they have, considering they're very much a cavalry-focused faction. And the dark smokestacks rise over CAIR Andros as the settlement is looking a little bit worse for wear. But there's 8 flag Rhun. That's not going to be enough to turn the tide of the battle. But yeah, Gondor and Dol Amroth will hold on to their settlement here. And a very impressive battle it was too. Very well coordinated defence, I have to say. Temple Guard dying on the field. And yeah, I have to say, like, there's not really much else to say. Like, no one really played too badly in this battle, I don't think. I think the attackers started off very well. The problem is, on this kind of settlement, of course, if the defenders play their cards right with their ranged units, it can be punishing for you, especially with Rangers. Like, the amount of kills that Rangers are capable of getting on this kind of settlement, I think, is going to be the difference here between victory and defeat for the attackers. Marksmen of CAIR Andros moving in to help support the Haven Guard. Not that they really need it. They've really shown their quality against the Temple Guard here. And as for the rest of the units, the Adunheim Shadow Bows out of ammunition. Charge forward so they could at least die in melee. If nothing else, they could kill the Gondorian general here who is fighting off against them, but considering he has the stats of a Nimlothian Honour Guardsman, I think an Adunheim Shadow Bow will do quite well to finish him off, especially seeing as the general tends to have tankier statistics as well to make him just that little bit harder to kill off. Which is why it's always a very frustrating thing when your general gets killed by a charge immediately. Ravenhelms as well. I have to say, the Ravenhelms not usually a unit you see do as well as they have done in this battle. Their abilities in melee, especially towards the latter ends of the fight, have definitely been impressive. And again, compared to most other heavy swordsmen, much like the Axemen of Lasarnak, who between the two units would be my personal pick for being more efficient, their main selling point is the fact, compared to a lot of other human units of similar class, they have much higher armour values, which makes them tankier. And the problem with two-handed units like this is often their staying power. They often die off more quickly than you would like. Well, I mean, this is optimistic. In spite of all the punishment he's taken, the Vengeful One is the last attacker left standing. 8 flag Rhun. I'd be very interested to see if they actually get into melee without routing. My guess is going to be no. Oftentimes units like this rarely get into melee before they, yeah, here we can see shaken. They're going to start wavering, surely. I guess they're actually quite fortunate the Wards of Minas Ithil are actually in the vanguard. Well, I mean, I don't know whether to count that, because I think they did rout just before the charge actually landed from the Wards of Minas Ithil. Or is he the last one left standing? Is there another unit? Well, I mean, they're going to get cut down to the last man here. I think we're actually going to see... Yeah, there he goes. I think we're actually going to see it admit defeat, because I think the last units technically are the ones that are sort of stuck in the Mumakil. Yeah, like you can see here, there are 4 Sapphire Bladesmen. There's a Gamp for him, although he's routing. Yeah, there he goes. And there we go. An impressive victory indeed. 3% the difference, which is obviously very close considering it's a 5v3. But yeah, you can see actually Dol Amroth getting noticeably the fewest kills, and mostly I would attribute that down to the fact that obviously Gondor had the lion's share of the archers here, which were always going to be the thing the defenders were going to have to rely on in this kind of battle, considering the numbers were what they were, and considering, you know, Gondor and Dol Amroth, when you put them together in a defensive siege, both of them, when you put them together, have got very strong infantry, but you're still going to need to rely on your archers quite a lot in this kind of siege, I think. But yeah, impressive performances all around, I would say. Steward of Dale did quite well initially, as well, alongside the 2 Mordor armies, I think, to take advantage of the quick retreat the defenders engaged in. I was worried for the defenders then, because when you take a lot of losses quickly as the defenders in this kind of situation, it can be very difficult to come back from it. But the defenders did just that. They utilised their ranged units brilliantly well, and I also think that the Gondorian and Dol Amroth infantry did well. Like later on, especially the Dol Amroth heavy swordsmen alongside the Gondorian ones, and initially the sort of more heavily armoured infantry and the spears of Gondor, I think in particular. I think this was a battle where Gondor in particular got to show their quality, but Dol Amroth as well. And all the attacks, I think none of them played particularly poorly. I think you could say maybe Mr. Sneakman was a little bit overzealous considering the situation that was in front of him, considering the narrow alleyway and the Rangers, but what else was he going to do really? Like, you have to try and smash through that quickly, otherwise the Rangers are just going to pick you apart anyway. So I feel as though you could argue that maybe the Mumakil were committed a little bit too soon, but again, I don't really think he had too much in the way of options there. And at the very least, he did start the ball rolling, and Rhun did quite well given that initial opening as well. But let's see what did the damage for Khan, because that was the player who we saw this battle from the perspective of. Very impressive from the Brotherhood of the Wain, initially with those missile units, and then of course during the retreat it was really the Chariots and the Beasts that did most of the damage, I have to say, in the Brotherhood of the Wain, and the Wain Riders of Rhun were the 2 that really cleaned up there inevitably. So very impressive there. It's not often you see Chariots get that many kills, to be fair, and it's all the more impressive, I would say, that the defenders were able to win in spite of the losses they took so quickly. Storm Guard, they were another unit which actually did distinguish themselves purely because of how long they lasted in situations that were fairly grisly for them, and getting 187 kills obviously with the AP, always going to be very nice against Gondor and Dol Amroth infantry. Rest of the army though did suffer under the weight of those arrows. Only one other unit broke 100 kills, and that was a unit of Nurad footmen. Again, not too surprising to see a unit with AP getting a decent amount of kills, but the Hwacha, I think the defenders with their tactics, in spite of the fact they did lose a lot of men initially, it did take away from the effectiveness of the Hwacha, so a bit of a silver lining there for them. As for the other armies, I'd imagine kind of similar. I'd imagine that for Harad, most of their kills probably came from Demons of the Desert later in the game. Most of their infantry probably struggled a little bit. Rhun, probably similar. I would say that again, quite a lot of kills coming from the Wain Riders initially, and then it was sort of a slow burn from there. And for Mordor, Tundra's Fox, higher end units probably did okay, and Y2K is probably fairly similar, although I think Y2K had more support coming over from Rhun and Harad, which is probably why he got slightly fewer, because obviously that was a very difficult approach to try and take. Yeah, and obviously for the defenders, quite obvious, ranged units, lion's share of the kills, Rangers particularly, but also the higher end infantry units. Nimlothi and Honor Guard deserve a special mention for their holding power, but also the heavy swordsmen of both factions, Ravenhelms distinguishing themselves, and of course Dol Amroth, but you expect the Dol Amroth heavy swordsmen to do quite well anyway. So yeah, and also one reason why Dol Amroth may very well have got fewer kills is their one unit of Nimrodal Rangers. We saw them running around fairly early on in the fight, looked like they'd taken quite a lot of damage, which is probably why Lango lagging behind his allies a little bit in terms of kills, because Rangers of course are so devastating. To lose them like that is obviously going to cut into your kill counts, but Gondor picked up the slack anyway, so it's not too much of a problem there. But yeah, big thank you to the Steward of Dale for sending this one in. A very high quality battle indeed. Nice to see CAIR ANDROS back in some semblance of the word anyway. It's a very good map, honestly. Like, even when CAIR ANDROS proper gets added back in, I hope that this one does remain a fixture and it just gets renamed into something else, because it's a well constructed map. It's a siege battle that on the face of it looks fairly linear, in that, you know, the attackers are forced down certain routes, but there's a lot more pathways through to the top layer than it initially seems. So yeah, it's a very well constructed map, I would say. So big thank you to the Steward of Dale once again big thank you to all the players that took part in this very good battle. As for what's next, this is on the normal build, so I do have the test build now, it's worth saying. But I will be sort of putting off the test builds until there's a couple on the normal build that I want to do first and foremost, including a battle where the legendary Corrigan was apparently aggressive. Which I'll have to believe it when I'll believe it when I see it. Like I'm probably going to do that battle next just because of that. I've also got another siege on the map Austin Airy, which is on the normal build as well. So I'll probably do those two next, and then I'll sort of transition on to doing the replays that I got sent on the test build, including the ones that Death Eater sent me. So don't worry, I've already got them in mind as well. And there is another one on the test build that I got sent by someone else as well. So I've pretty much got like 5 battles, a series of 5 battles that I'm going to try and do next, as well as obviously other ones which are here and there. So again, no real set schedule for these things, just a sort of loose idea. But yeah, I think the one where Corrigan is allegedly being aggressive will potentially be my next one, unless it's really long and during my next recording session I don't have the time to do that one, in which case there'll be sort of a rethink around that. But of course that's just part of the course, and like I said, sort of any news will be relayed in a channel update and not wedged at the end or start of a regular video. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.